all MPs are crooks. That's what a lot of people are saying, but actually I don't really agree with them. What I think is that most MPs start out with a very clean slate with terrifically good intentions and just gradually get seduced into starting to claim a little bit for this and a little bit for that until eventually they end up on the slippery slope where, for example, we find a recent case of a politician, an MP, putting in a £5 expenses claim because he put £5 in a church collection. Can you believe it? Easily, actually. One of the outcomes from our recent political conniption has really been a tremendous amount of excitement and interest in the UK's political and electoral system. MPs have been running around like headless chickens, and the first thing they started to do was say, "Gosh, I'm sorry, I didn't know that I shouldn't have done this, I'll give the money back, is that okay?" Well, I didn't really notice Ronnie Briggs doing that after he did the great train robbery, and actually the amount of money taken across all those politicians is probably much more. Saying sorry, I'm afraid, just isn't enough. The reality is that giving the money back isn't enough. In fact, the truth is, and this is how I think many people feel, whatever you do isn't enough. You shouldn't have committed the crime in the first place, because let's face it, what these MPs have done is simply and straightforwardly a crime. It's defrauding the people who pay your wages, whether that's the government, whatever you like to call that, whether that's the population of the UK, whoever it is. You have claimed money that you know that you're not entitled to. That's illegal, it's a crime, you shouldn't do it, but if you do, you should pay the consequences. That's as simple as that. Of course, the legalities aren't anything near the whole point. The whole point, the big point, the most important point is that if people, whoever they are, do this kind of thing, how can we ever trust them again? How can we actually trust politicians not to do what politicians usually do, which is let the problems blow over and then start taking advantage again? Because that's what I think they'll do, and I'm sure in your heart of hearts that's what you think they'll do. Once this all blows over, the expenses claims will start to creep up again. They'll start to gradually go up, and before we know it, again in 5 or 6 years' time, there'll be a big outcry in one of the papers, MPs are getting too much expenses. So maybe after all this nonsense, it's time to actually take a proper look at our electoral system, at the way we're represented, and at what the people who represent us are paid. Because for a starting point on that issue, why do MPs get 2.5 times Britain's national average wage for a full-time employee? They earn £64,000 a year. Am I jealous? Not really, but I think it's more than they deserve. The truth of the matter is that our MPs can earn £64,000 a year. After serving for just 13 years in Parliament, they're entitled to a pension of around £20,000 a year. Gosh, I wish I'd known that. I'd have become an MP when I was 25. The point about these salaries, of course, is not just the money. It's the fact that we live in what's called a representative democracy. That means that the people we elect are elected to represent us. I have to tell you that, from my viewpoint, someone who earns 2.5 times the national average salary, someone who potentially gets 20, 30, 50 or however many grand a year in expenses, doesn't represent me. They don't represent anybody apart from themselves. So let's start dealing with our political system, and let's make it a root and branch change. Let's look at the way we're represented. Let's look at the way our representatives are paid. Let's look at the way that we control and influence our representatives. I honestly think that MPs' salaries should be related to the national average wage. I believe that expenses should be related to the real costs of living. So in other words, maybe our MPs, if they live more than 50 miles away from Westminster, should have a second home, but that should be owned and leased to them by the government, effectively giving them free accommodation. It's not too important. If they live within 50 miles of London, well, they can catch the train and the tube just the same as anybody else does. Or maybe if they need to stay for an overnight for a late sitting, we can book them into a hotel. We don't mind, but I'm not going to fund MPs to have a second home that they can sell at enormous capital gains. Why should I? Why should you? As far as the rest of their expenses is concerned, you put in receipts for your meals that you need to have out, you put in receipts for your flights and for your train fares, and you put in receipts for your phone bill. All the other stuff is nonsense and advantage taking, which too many MPs have been doing for too long. Let's make a start also at looking at the MP's wonderful and generous pension system. Did you know that if you were a sitting MP for 13 years, you could leave with a pension of $20,000 a year? Why do you think some of the MPs who have been demonstrated to be crooks are actually leaving at the end of this Parliament? It's because they don't care. They're leaving, they've got big pensions, they're laughing their socks off. I fully agree with David Cameron when he says maybe the police should investigate these cases, but what we really need to do is to say, hey guys, we'll investigate your expenses claims. If you're proved guilty of defrauding your expenses, what should happen to you is the same as what happens to a policeman who's sacked, someone in whom we trust and someone upon whom we rely. They go with no pension. They say goodbye. They are left to fend for themselves. Why not? If you're proved to be a crook, why should you benefit in the end?